morning, everyone, and welcome to... Just for dramatic effect. Welcome to the data session. I'm always conscious that the data session can be the pre-lunch sort of graveyard shift, especially having heard reports of some of your nights out last night. Great to have come together and had some fun, but also data is a really important theme of what we're talking about today. So hopefully our speakers will bring it to life, help give context to the story so far, help bring some science and rigour to that. I'm going to remind you of something a couple of times through this session, I think. The Minister just said that this will help place a value on an exciting new sector. We all know that. But then she went on to say it will help shape policy and support for the sector. So where some of you might have wanted numbers and more detail, she's given you a very clear invitation that this data set, these data sets that have been pulled together are really, really important. So first up, we've got Raymond Mcintyre from Visit Scotland. He's an insight economist. He's helped pull all this data set together. He's going to run through some of the key themes relating to this first growth tracker. The other thing I picked up from the Minister was this, she talked about it being an annual census. That's really important because that level of data and feedback back to a Minister, if they're interested in hearing it, that's good news. So Raymond, if you can bring us to some of these insights, some of the key themes, and some of the things we'll already know, and some will be revelations to us, I'm sure. So over to you, Raymond.
Thank you. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to present the findings of the Agritourism's Inaugural Growth Tracker. It's been one of the core projects that I've worked on this year, and it's really exciting to report back to so many interested people that have got a real passion for developing the sector in the coming years. I'll hopefully cover quite a lot in the next 15 minutes or so, aiming to finalise the main growth tracker report by the end of the month, and that will have a lot more of the granular detail in it. So that doc we're hoping to do in the next 4 weeks or so. However, today what I'm going to do is just cover some of the high-level findings and some of the emerging themes that are coming through. So in terms of the structure, I'll just quickly recap on the background and the purpose. I'll refer back to some of the policy and strategy documents that inform some of the initial analysis and SWOT analysis that we've done that helped contextualise some of the work. Move on to looking at some of the key findings in terms of responses, profile, key performance indicators, forecasted value, and I'll also look at some of the planned projects and some of the barriers to development and outline some of the emerging themes that are coming through, and then just quickly link it in with the strategy and the action plan and just note some of the next steps. So just quickly in terms of the background and purpose, what we've done here is we've effectively set a baseline for the sector. So this is going to help us define, understand and quantify what the current impacts are. And this can then be used to promote and position agritourism for support and funding. And it also helps because it allows us to look at some of the wider impacts and some of the indirect impacts that aren't necessarily quantifiable. In a growth context, what it does, it will allow us to inform growth by informing the strategy development. It will obviously shape future policy, strategy, investment decisions, and identify projects and what the overall sort of growth potential is of Scottish agritourism. And maybe most importantly of all, identify what the key barriers are to growth. So before we started the analysis, we reviewed the strategic direction and development objectives of all the relevant strategies for agriculture, tourism and food and drink. And it demonstrated the real reinforcing role of each sector to achieve sector-specific objectives and also shared objectives. And also allowed us to very quickly see where agritourism, a growth strategy and the growth tracker sat within this context. and importantly also provided us with a lot of information that allowed us to prepare a high-level SWOT analysis. So this provided a really good foundation to the growth tracker. It allowed us to identify the real sort of elements of commonality between the different sectors and all the challenges that are faced. So, for example, it allowed us to look at the commonality in terms of labour, force shortages, skills, growth, sustainability, greenhouse gas emissions, and also to a certain extent preserving culture and heritage. And we could quickly see then that agritourism could be the sort of common thread, if you like, that helps address some of these structural weaknesses in agritourism, tourism and food and drink, while also playing a real leading role in maximising the shared opportunities. So a good example here is really the sort of links that can be made between agritourism opportunities providing inclusive employment for external workers within the area, family members, women in terms of women directors, and this really helps stem rural depopulation. It helps diversify revenue streams, and it really contributes towards improving overall farm profitability. So, as I say, this initial sort of SWOT work that we've done and strategy work, we've done this while we're waiting on the survey findings coming through. So the next step was very much to go through the survey data, armed with this information from anecdotal sources, strategies, a lot of different sources, and to pick out the data and not really just report back from the strategy in terms of what people said, but really comment on the implications. So in terms of responses, we got 179 responses. So a sort of good mix of those involved currently in agritourism and those planning to be involved. So what this meant was we got a good appreciation of the dynamics of people that were involved, but also gave us good information on the pipeline of projects and also what the barriers were for them. So we think there's about 500 at least 500 agritourism businesses. So I think maybe one of the sort of small issues is that some of the larger operators didn't provide a response. But in terms of the number of responses that we got for that sort of overall population of 500, we do consider it to be, broadly quite representative of the industry, of the sector, and it's certainly representative of the views of those that are most motivated in terms of taking the sector forward. We were able to split the data and the findings in a huge amount of ways. We can do various crosstabs. So one of the first things that we've done was we looked at what the geographies that we could look at here. So we've split it into Scottish Enterprise Agency level, and that might work for different funding applications. We've also split the findings into Scottish Tourist Board areas, so it means that different geographies can be aligned with visitor statistics. And we've also looked at local authorities where data control guidance permits. But it won't surprise anyone that to see that the highest concentrations of agritourism activities are in the most prominent in rural geographies characterised by agriculture. So I'll just run through just some of the sort of high-level profile information just to set some context. In terms of birth year, over 40% have started within the last 5 years, so that obviously demonstrates quite a lot of entrepreneurial spirit. As Caroline mentioned earlier, agritourism is obviously something that's not new to Scotland, so it was good to see that we still got a fifth of responses that were in operation before 1999, so it shows quite a sort of broad spectrum of responses. In terms of businesses, almost 3/4 considered themselves to be farm businesses, around 1 in 10 either crofts or estates. In terms of size, again, broad distribution size, but small farms less than 50 hectares are more likely to be involved. Main activities were Scotch beef, Scotch lamb production, and also cereal activity. One of the important ones that we got through was in terms of availability. So what we got here was that there's widely reported availability throughout the year, with at least 3/4 of facilities available during the traditional sort of down period or shoulder months. So this is an example of the type of chart you can expect to see in the final growth tracker report. So it just uses the conditional formatting just to show where the sort of higher concentrations are of different types of activities. So you can see there for on-farm cafes, restaurants and pop-ups, the highest concentration there is obviously in Aberdeen and Grampian. When you move on to farm tours, experiences, there's a more even distribution across Scotland. So charts like this sort of help the interpretation of the final report that will be due out in a month or so. We were able to establish visitor figures. We know this was quite hard for some operators, but as a sort of first pass, we were quite happy with the figures that we got, and we were able to obviously break them down into different areas and different visitation and custom per week. So in terms of visitation, we've got 577,000 agri-tourism visitors, and when you look at farm retail, it's just over 1 million. No surprises, the vast majority are from Scotland, and there was obviously an increased reliance on the domestic market during the pandemic. Now for the turnover question. So this is obviously the one that was going to give you your sort of sector value, and it's when you do a study like this, it's the figure probably that most people are interested in. I would tend to dissuade people from looking too much at the figure that we've got at the moment. We know it's important to put an indicative figure in there, and that's why we've done it. Obviously, if we had 100% responses, we'd be able to say with great precision what the overall sector value was. So this is still sort of work in progress, and I'd suggest that we maybe use the figure for sort of average turnover per business as the main KPI for this at the moment. But we were obviously able to look at, from the number of responses, what average turnover was per agri-tourism business, per farm retail business, and then if we were to look at what that was, if we were to extrapolate it up to the number of known operators, you can see you're getting around sort of 60 million for agri-tourism and farm retail. But the true figure, that's probably going to be the sort of lowest estimate you're likely to see, and that's a very conservative value, as we think it's going to be several tens of millions higher than that. And the real opportunity is in terms of making sure that we address the barriers over the next year to two, in terms of bringing in new entrants and making sure that those that have reported forecast increasing growth actually are able to achieve that growth. So it was encouraging again to look at the turnover growth forecast there, where you've got 66% of agri-tourism businesses forecasting quite significant increases in turnover over the next year. And again, that's similar with farm retail, not farm retail, typo there. So another really encouraging piece of analysis here was to look at the actual employment. So we were able to split this down into really disaggregated analysis. So we're able to split it into part-time, full-time, management, non-management, and family and external workers. So it gave us a real sort of detailed, granular view of what the employment patterns look like across different types of operations. And what you can see there is that agri-tourism employment, when you break it down into full-time equivalents, it's actually very similar to what you'd expect to get for farm employment. So you can see, if you were looking at employment densities, a small area, a small patch is almost creating as much employment as the whole farm. And then when you were to look at that in terms of farm retail, it's much higher. You've got an average 8.5 full-time equivalents per farm retail. And the other really interesting thing to note here is the high levels of external employment, which is obviously really important for rural areas. The other interesting part of this was that we had a question on male and female directors under the age of 40 and over the age of 40. So there's a very clear split. So there's a much higher proportion of male directors in farm operations, farm businesses, both over 40 and under 40, but that pattern is completely reversed for agritourism and farm retail, which is obviously good for providing inclusive employment opportunities. Again, what all this does is it provides the evidence base and the data to back up what is a lot of sort of known or anecdotal information. So it's the first time that you can really evidence all this in the one place. In terms of profitability, this is another really good slide here, because what you're seeing here is extremely high levels of profitability associated with agritourism compared to farm excluding subsidy and including subsidy. When you look at farm retail, that was slightly lower, but still exceeds farm excluding subsidy. So you can see here again how agritourism can be used to sort of provide revenue streams to cross or to use for sort of cross funding in other areas of farm business. In terms of capital investment, you'll see here that there's obviously been relatively high levels of historic and forthcoming investment that's planned for agritourism on average since opening. Each agritourism business has invested 452,000, which I think is quite a considerable figure, and plans almost another £100,000 per business over the next 2 years. Slightly lower when you look at farm retail, £140,000 per business, but still, very considerable. And obviously this goes on to support further rounds of investment and support further jobs in rural economies. So this slide here just shows you what the sort of pipeline of projects are coming forward and when they're likely to come forward. So accommodation projects were the most frequently identified projects, especially glamping, farm cottages, camping areas. But I think that also reflects that where we've been in the last year or so. Farm tours and experiences and event space, probably the type of projects that align best with the strategy, were also extremely popular projects. So around half of the projects, if you look there, plan to be built out or completed within the next 12 months, around another half for 1 to 3 years. And then if you look at the two end columns, for some projects, some people were slightly unsure or had a slightly longer time frame. So main barriers to development. So you've got over 50% of respondents thought that costs and funding barriers and time and resources were the main restricting factors that limited development. Around a quarter also said a lack of knowledge is a real key restricting barrier. So the table on the right-hand side was the list of options that we provided, but we also were able to pick up on the various verbatim comments for different questions. So the planning system in many of its forms was seen as a real limiting factor, along with a lack of staff, particularly tradesmen, local and regional competition, economic uncertainty. One of the interesting ones was in terms of infrastructure, and that included not just internet and Wi-Fi, but was also access and road access out with the farm area. But overall, I suppose you could summarise it by saying it's a sort of overall sort of general information that was required, and also very specific information in terms of advice on loans, planning system, and market potential as well. So what I've covered there is just a couple of sort of real high-level findings, but you can see how some of the data can be used, because we can look at various crosstabs to look at different geographies, we can look at different activities, we can crosstab it with what the barriers are to them, so we can do quite a lot of real granular analysis But this is effectively the sort of top line takeaway sort of findings from it. But it gives us now the evidence to now say with a lot more clarity and conviction that that these emerging themes here are representative of agritourism. So we can now say that agritourism we know is a provider of inclusive opportunities, and we can now put together a whole host of different tables and data sets to show why that's the case. We can also relate into the strong growth expectations and profitability levels compared to traditional farm operations. We can look at various other things in terms of the level of historic investment and look at the wider impacts of what that investment means in terms of a rural context. We also had questions in there in relation to sustainable working practices, so that will all make it into the final report as well. So what that does is it means that it gives us the information to evidence all the social, economic and environmental benefits associated with agritourism and make a real strong case for it in that setting. So the next steps are going to be that we complete the growth tracker. We'll then link it into the strategy. Much of that's already been done, but the main thing is linking in the sort of key barriers to development into the action plan and making sure that that's addressed in the action plan and there's a named stakeholder or task associated with each of the barriers to resolve that. And as I said earlier, we can prepare more granular analysis if there is an interest in a particular activity in a particular area, or there is a very precise piece of data that is needed to support a particular argument. Then we can drill down into that and prepare a separate report or data set. And then it's moving on to the feedback that we got from the 2021 survey and incorporating that into the new questionnaire for next year. But personally, I'd just like to thank everyone that took the time to complete the growth tracker and really advise everyone else and recommend them to do so if they're in a position to next year as well. It's an extremely valuable data set and we're just scratching the surface of it at the moment, and it's really essential for the sustainable development of the sector. And that's me. Thank you very much.
And for that's really helpful and really interesting to see those data sets. We're now going to go to the magic of Zoom. We're all much more familiar with Zoom than we have been a year ago. We're joined by Thomas Streifeneder from Eurac. Thomas is going to bring a European dimension to this. I know that Italy gets mentioned in an agri-tourism context quite a lot. He's going to give us a case study from Italy. In one of his blogs, I was really taken by a line that Thomas said, farms that only have a donkey or a cat can hardly feature, or any features of a real farm should not be included in agritourism. And I think that's really important for us to know that definition that you as a group have worked on, and to know what a working farmer croft is. Because one of the things that I get frustrated about as I travel around Scotland is people pertaining to know what food and agriculture is all about, and actually they're not. They're a bit of a sham. So hopefully I'm not offended anyone with donkeys or cats, but I do think credibility of agritourism is really important in there. So my leap of faith now is that I will say that Thomas is about to appear, and Raymond, you can have a seat down here and relax and listen to Thomas.
Ladies and gentlemen, good day from sunny Italy. Very nice to have the opportunity to speak to you. Many thanks to the organizers and especially to Caroline Miller for the kind invitation to speak. I hope you can hear me and you see my shared presentation. Yeah? Okay, very good. I think your work, Caroline, is very, very important and great for promoting sustainable tourism. So really, you're doing a great job, and go on with it. And furthermore, I want to, before I start, I want to mention that I think the approach to develop an agritourism growth strategy within a working group, including external experts, is very good and exemplary. And I think this could be also a model for other regions or well-developed regions that have a huge growth of agritourism. And I think a growth strategy is also needed in those regions that experience a high intensity of agritourism. Furthermore, in line with what was said by the Cabinet Secretary and also by Caroline, I would like to stress a little bit the importance, and when it comes to the development of this tourism, agritourism, and to pay attention to make this sector a smart and sustainable form of tourism in rural areas, because this is the great differentiating criteria of this sector. Its strong connection to nature and agriculture, which can only be convincing if the offer itself is natural and sustainable. So I'm not very much in favor of forms of luxury and wellness tourism that are, in my opinion, not well compatible with agritourism due to its environmental impacts. I think there are other offers for this, and it's not expedient to compete with them. But I will explain that also later. So the objectives of this presentation is to present a little bit the state of art of agritourism in selected countries, and to have a focus on Italy. Italy was the initiator of agritourism and somehow is the international leader in agritourism with a long history of governance and ruling of the sector and providing some good statistics. Presenting these points, I try to mention the challenges and problems for the sector, and I put some question remarks behind some points. And I do this based on specific understanding and concept of agritourism that I call authentic agritourism. I'm not very content with the term authentic. The huge discussion what is authentic and what is not authentic. But anyhow, I labeled it somehow based on work of Scottish colleagues, Philip and Flanagan, that introduced the term authentic agritourism. So I also called it, I labeled my approach authentic agritourism. That is based somehow on specific objectives of the sector defined by the legislator in Italy. So what does it mean, agritourism? I think the definition of agritourism has been rephrased and redefined by many theorists and researchers, and there's no universal definition of the concept in the literature. And some make the difference between core and peripheral activities depending on how close they are connected to agriculture and a local rural culture. However, for better understanding of some of my comments, I briefly want to explain my understanding of what I call even authentic agritourism. And one point is the complementarity of touristic with agricultural activities. So agritourism should not negatively impact agriculture production. On the contrary, agritouristic income should strengthen it. And you see in this figure that I make the distinction between, so in the framework of tourism in rural areas, I make the distinction between authentic and countryside tourism. And authentic agritourism, as we heard this morning by Caroline, yes, it's on a working farm producing products. The structures and activities correspond to the setting of an active farm. Agricultural activities predominate, agritouristic ones. The accommodation is located where possible, if possible, in farm buildings, and there's obviously an enabled interaction. And this is opposed to tourism on a non-working farm or visits to traditional cultural, sport and other events in rural areas, and what I call commercial agritourism. There's already some work done, also by Italians, concerning commercial agritourism. This is tourism on a working farm, but offering to hotel-like touristic facilities and accommodation structures decoupled from the farmhouse. Activities are very staged for touristic purposes and linked to agriculture, lifestyle and practices. And other things are volunteer work and wildlife opportunities on organic farms, spoofing, that are working opportunities on farms, and I would make a distinction between these kind of activities. So what are the goals of agritourism? So first of all, obviously, it's a differentiation and diversification, as we already heard, and support of family farm incomes to maintain and promote multifunctional agriculture activities in rural areas. And we heard this morning also the point of multiplicator effects for rural areas. So agritourism has obviously not a positive impact on the farm, but on the surrounding areas. And it's about to develop territorial landscape resources. So it's using the building heritage that it's very much in the focus in Italy, at least, and restoring it. It's about supporting typical quality food production and traditions, and it's promoting rural culture, heritage, and food education. So it's very difficult to find numbers because convincing figures are not available, because there are specific numbers on agritourism are not recorded, because agritourism is somehow handled as a secondary agricultural activity or diversification activity. It's a hybrid form. Sometimes it counts as agriculture, sometimes to tourism. So there are blurred boundaries between these categories. And finally, if you take the membership data of the associations, not all agritourism businesses are part of their associations. So also these data are somehow incomplete. But so these figures should be taken with caution and understood as a rough approximation. But anyhow, you see that we have in Italy nearly 25,000 establishments offering agritourism, heading Tuscany with over 5,000, and our region here in South Tyrol with over 3,000 establishments. This means that we have here in our region in South Tyrol, with a very high touristic intensity, 20% of all farms offering agritourism. And they cover nearly 10% of all overnight stays. So there's a really huge impact and intensity of agritourism in our region, and closely linked to the general overall intensity of tourism in our region as touristic hotspot of the Alps. And we have a revenue of over 100 million euros of this sector. This is a comparable turnover as the wine growing sector in our region.
Thomas,
then we have in Germany.
I'm sorry, Thomas, to interrupt you. We're not been able to see your slides. I just wondered if you'd managed to make your PowerPoint live. I don't know if you mean to, but we can't see your slides moving forward. Would you mind perhaps adjusting your PowerPoint?
I moved it now forward. You can't see that? Okay. Oh, this is a pity. Okay, let's see. I'll try to share it again.
Not on presentation mode, and when you're going through the slides, it's not going from, we're still in your holding slide at the front.
Okay, this means what I have to do. You don't see now you see it? Changing the slides?
Yes, we can do it now, but you're not in presentation mode. So if you go to slideshow down the bottom right, that might help, but we're certainly moving slides now. So if you want to restart speaking and make sure you click onto whichever slide you're on, that would be helpful.
Yeah, okay, so this is a pity. So, I talked about this slide here. Now you see the slide?
Yep.
Okay, so I have to go move on like this. Sorry for that. I was talking about this figure, obviously, differentiation between authentic agritourism, countryside tourism, and then the others go. So I finished here with the numbers. So sorry for this shortcoming here. As I said, it's quite difficult to have concrete numbers concerning agritourism because they are counted in different ways. But you see here some rough figures and the different intensity of agritourism in certain ways. So what I did in this for this presentation, I made a brief explorative assessment based on experts' comments on a couple of guiding questions. So I had very valuable inputs from Hans Enbacher. He's the CEO of Farm Holidays Organization in Austria, and my friend and colleague Jackie Taylor, CEO and founder of Rural Tourism in Africa, and obviously inputs concerning Italy based on also on additional information based on my own research. And the question focused on binding definition and limits, the legal status and taxation status of agritourism, policies, activities, trends, and marketing. And what is now a farmer who can offer agritourism? So we have in Austria a farmer as a mandatory member of the Chamber of Agriculture with at least 1 hectare of agricultural workland or 3 hectares of used wood. In South Africa, we have a certain code of conduct. This means agritourism is limited to family-owned farms, opposed to farms owned by cooperatives and companies. So agritourism tries to involve everyone who lives on a farm and earns their living from the land. We have then in Italy a more extensive definition. So everybody who is involved in farming, forestry, animal husbandry, and related activities can offer agritourism, but furthermore also companies and private persons, this means partnerships or associations. Then we have regional regulations. So we have a framework law on national level, and the framework law delegates precise regulations on regional level. And we have here, I give you the example of our region here in South Tyrol, we have minimum agricultural requirements. These, for example, the management of at least 1.5 hectare of fruit orchards or vineyards, 1 hectare of meadow or arable forage land or special crops. And concerning grassland and fodder farms, we have a minimum total number of 1.5 livestock units with a minimum livestock rate of 1.5 units per hectare. So you see, these are, you called your farms, small farms with less than 50 hectares. So you see we have here other very small structured agricultural situation. And obviously these limits are obviously to be seen in relationship to the overall very small structured agriculture sector in our region. Then who is applying legally binding regulations? In most countries, we don't have sectoral specific legal regulation and binding laws. Italy is an exception as the only country with a national framework law starting in the mid-80s and then 2002 and 2006. So the national framework law gives a framework, delegates precise regulation on prevalence of agriculture activity and limits to the regions, describes legal definition, provides a legal definition and definition of activities, and also legally protects the term of agritourism. There we have the situation in the US where we don't have even on national level policies, but we have in 39 or 50 states in the US on state or country or local level regulations. So this means in the US we have not a national framework law but regional regulations. Who is applying legally binding regulations? So many countries indirectly steer agritourism within the framework of trade regulations for entrepreneurial commercial activities. It means that they are somehow integrated in the regulation regarding private landlords and room rentals. So it's the aim is here, the point is here to make a differentiation from a legal and financial point of view to commercial tourism businesses, rental of rooms, by the extent of the accommodation activity. That is, the accommodation activity on a farm should be a domestic secondary side employment. This is the definition in Austria, or should be not more than a diversification activity on the farm in addition to agriculture, in a relationship of connection with the activities for land cultivation, forestry, and animal husbandry. So To steer this, they generally define and measure a maximum number of beds, room apartments. And these maximum numbers should guarantee the temporal predominance of agriculture. You see in the next slide some exemplary limits for the capacity. So we have different situations, obviously, in many countries, and in Austria, up to a limit of 10 beds. The agritourism activity is a household site activity. But if you go beyond 10 guest beds, the holiday farm, the agritourism needs a license, which is the same license as hotels, needed by hotels, and they have to register commercial activity. So these limits are important to acknowledge because they are relevant for financial support and taxation issues. Meaning if the farm passes these thresholds, then another taxation scheme and starts. The fiscal policy, agricultural commercial taxation, is again in Austria up to 10 beds. The turnover and the income is integrated in a flat rate lump sum system, as what called Pauschalisierung. And this means we have a fixed amount of tax according to the unified value of their farm. And beyond this limit, the claim of expenses can be made within a fixed rate of 50% or a revenue expenditure accounting. In South Africa, we have, with the accommodation, we have a change of rate zoning from agriculture to agri-commercial tourism. So this means that the rates are 2 times higher than the agricultural rates if someone introduces agritourism on his farm or her farm. In Italy, we have, as I said, we have a temporal predominance of agriculture. This is the key point. So income from agriculture in this case is handled like an agricultural income. And the agricultural income is lower tax compared to the total, to other commercial incomes in the touristic sector. So in South Tyrol, for example, we have approximately a 25% taxation, meaning that a farm that earns 40,000 euro with agritouristic activities pays more or less 5,000 euros value added tax. Okay, supporting policies, which measures strengthen the sector. So we have in Austria the farm holidays strategy. This is issued by the Ministry of Agriculture since the late 80s and revised every 10 years. And there's also the possibility within the National Rural Development Strategy to get funding for the activities on the farm, agritouristic activities on the farm. In South Africa, we don't have specific policies, but in Italy, and here again, I refer to the example in South Tyrol, we have a co-funding possibility in form of capital contribution or a loan via the rotation fund that is available for the construction, modernization, expansion of accommodations as well lounges, including the purchase of furnishing. We have the processing and storage rooms for products that are served or sold to the guest. And we have even co-funding of premises for the storage, preparation, processing and marketing of predominantly farm-grown agricultural products. So you see there are based on specific prerequisites and conditions. So the limits are a little bit higher. If a farm wants to apply for this co-funding, the limits are a little bit higher than the minimum agricultural limits I presented before. And obviously you have a 40 to 50% co-funding rate depending on the severity points or points of locational disadvantage in mountain areas. No? Furthermore, you can have a sort of co-funding even for expenditures for promotional material and organization as well as implementation of events and meetings. So looking at my time, I have to speed up a little bit. I want to talk too much on the activities, but because we already heard even my former presenter, this is in line with the former presenter said. In most countries, we have the accommodation and farm buildings. So we have the offering of room and apartments. The question mark I put here, what about how to handle separate chalets, open spaces for campers, campsites. There's a discussion going on if this should be included or not in agritourism. Then we have obviously with and without gastronomy catering, based on a quite high share and variety of own and local products. So in Italy, we have between 60 and 80% of the products offered on a farm should come from their own farm or from the surrounding farms. In many countries, we have room and apartments with breakfast and half board. For example, in Austria, this is not possible in apartments. You need a specific license. So again, here you see the difference of handling of agritourism and catering in the countries. And then we have in Italy catering, gastronomy and tasting of farm products without accommodation. This is for 20% of the farms, they offer no accommodation, but they offer gastronomy and tastings. Then obviously we have the part of experiencing the farm life, helping out on the farm in the stable. The question mark is here the dimension of helping being active on a farm. So there are, if it's in a limited dimension, from my point of view, it's okay. But if you obviously work too much on a farm, this is not a touristic activity anymore. So this change a little bit the characteristic of the stay. And I think it's reasonable to think about the extent here. The same holds true for outdoor recreation, so hiking, educational experience, entertainment, agritainment, also question mark here, direct sales, are they part of agritourism or are these direct marketing activities or edutainment or agritainment and not belonging to agritourism? You see here some figures from Italy that we have about 40% of the 25,000 businesses provide only accommodation, overnight accommodation without catering. Then we have 1/3 that offer overnight accommodation with breakfast, slightly more than 1 in 5 offer full board, and 20% offer only catering or tasting without accommodation. Okay, where are the trends? So I'm coming slightly to my end. Trends, where's the development going? In Austria, Mr. Embacher said to me, informed me that there's a shift from renting out rooms toward renting apartments. There is a growing demand for apartments with breakfast, what is still not allowed without license, as I said before. And there's a huge demand for sufficient space, activities in nature, and regional food. In South Africa, it's very much about health aspects, breathe healthy air, being in the natural environment for children to get some exercise, enjoying healthy meals. In Italy, we have an increasing number of educational farms and social farming, but we have also a growing number of commercial businesses with high price and luxurious offers. I'm skeptical a little bit concerning this development, could be a point of discussion, but we see it in our region that it's still a niche, but we see the trend towards high price and luxurious offers. And in my point of view, and this is what the Scottish Agritourism Growth strategy should focus very much on the policies, so concerning definitions and regulations, because I fear that they are too permissive and allow too much activities that may not be integrative part, in my opinion, of authentic agritourism. So we see here some concerning some hints regarding marketing quality levels, who is doing what. We have a large variety of associations on international level. We have several associations, as in Italy, we have 3 associations in Italy, for example, and 1 overall association. So there's a mixture of different approaches. It's I see if you become member of these association, obviously you apply to certain quality standards that are very specific. For example, in our region, they encompass criteria regarding the infrastructural establishments, but also the number of food and products we have to provide and so on. And but some also introduced classification schemes that are similar to the STAR classification in the hotel industry sector. And I'm a little bit, again, here skeptical if this is a good approach. Okay, some conclusions, key messages from my side. Obviously, as we heard before, and this is absolutely true, there's a huge appreciation of agritourism holidays by a strongly growing number of tourists. We see that in many countries, especially in Italy, we have a growth since the late 90s in our region by 250% of the establishments here in our region. So this is really an increasing and still increasing sector. We have, as I hopefully demonstrated, huge differences in the intensity, governance, and type of activities. There are a large variety of activities offered. My question is here, where are the limits? What belongs to agritourism, what not? We need binding regulations with reasonable agriculture and touristic limits to guarantee predominance of agriculture. This is the core working farm predominance of agriculture to support authentic agritourism businesses. And what I see that is, we have still not yet exploited fully the full health potential of natural and environmental applications and innovative educational offers using the assets of the farm and natural environment. So the farmhouse pharmacy, fresh air cure for body and soul, recovering, relaxing, enjoying, learning, understanding. These are all possibilities, activities that could be increasingly developed on an agritourism farm. So yeah, I thank you very much for your attention, and I apologize for the shortcoming with the presentation here.
No, Thomas, you did a great job there. Thank you for that, and some really interesting things to get us going for questions. Riddell, Graham needs very little introduction, and given time, I will be brief. Riddell's a bit of a godfather of tourism in Scotland, and we're delighted that he's still happy to be involved following his retirement as a Director of Partnerships for Visit Scotland. So, Riddell, over to you.
Thanks, Alan. You'll be delighted to know I have no slides. Clearing out my desk on my last day at Visit Scotland 6 weeks ago, I came across a sheet of paper headed, "What makes a successful tourism business?" I thought I would share what it said in the sheet. Successful businesses know their customers. They know who they are, where they're from, why they chose to visit or experience their product. Successful businesses provide what the customer wants by listening to feedback and constantly improving and changing, looking for new ideas. Caroline Miller provides some interesting handcuffs for our adult theme breaks. Successful businesses keep in touch with their customers. They remind them that they still exist and are keen to welcome them back and tell them of special offers or any new innovations that have been introduced. They answer the phone, or they respond promptly to emails and social media posts, and are not defensive when things go wrong. I well remember speaking at the Association of Self-Caterers conference in 2006, and I told them about the 5 inquiries I'd made for self-catering in Pitlochry, and I'm still waiting for 4 responses to this day. Successful businesses also know who their competitors are and what they're up to, and yes, shamelessly steal or borrow the best ideas. I remember the Melrose Bed and Breakfast Mafia years ago, who used to have coffee mornings and allow people that came to them to look around the property and look at good ideas. And again, Caroline Miller visiting 5-star hotels to check the quality of the offer or cross-checking to decide what price to charge. Successful businesses keep up to date with what's happening in their particular sector or market or wider industry. How many of you in the audience regularly check visitscotland.org or are signed up to get regular e-updates. Sad as I am, I now have Agri-Tourism on my Google Alerts, and you get some great market insights from all over the world, and it's free. Success means constantly investing in the quality of the offer and in the training and development of people and staff. Quality-assured businesses are 2.5 times more likely to get referred bookings from visitscotland.com than non-QA'd. Successful businesses embrace technology in all its forms to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of their business. They work with others, either in their local area or their wider sector, are members of a local destination organisation or a sector organisation, and get all they can from the partnership with the Tourist Board. And above all, they have a positive and can-do attitude on life. I was surprised when I looked at the dates at the foot of that sheet of paper, because it said, source, the annual general meeting of the Scottish Borders Tourist Board, 1981, 40 years ago, updated for the ASSC conference in 2006. So what has that got to do with the subject of my presentation, data? Well, if you look at several of the top tips for success, they rely entirely on collecting and analysing and measuring performance. In this case, data that helps businesses succeed. Data on customers, who they are, where they live, why they choose you, what they like, what they dislike, how they book, how often do they visit. Data on competitors. Data on what's happening in your sector, what the trends are. Data on the latest visit marketing campaigns. Data on how to innovate and make more money. Data on how to use better technology. The list is endless. Successful businesses measure success by collecting data. I thought I'd share a few anecdotes from my past. In 1985, I know that's a long time ago, some of you probably weren't even born, the Scottish Borders Visitors Guide, the outside back cover of that guide cost £17,000. Now that was a lot of money in those days. And I well remember a hotel, prominent hotel in the Borders, booking the outside back cover. And at the end of the season, we decided to contact them, keen to know how much business they'd received and how much it had generated, how much value they had received. Oh, we didn't ken. We never asked people how they found out about us. Schoolboy error. It's quite simply resolved by a question at the point of booking. How did you hear about us? When was the last time you were ever asked that question, or in your business asked that question of your customers? I've stayed in 3 hotels in the past month, and I was never asked. And it was never on the prompt sheet in terms of the booking. And at the point of checkout, or you're asking for feedback online, as well as asking the obvious question, what kind of time have you had? Was everything okay? Why not ask one simple question? And I have never been asked this. If there was one thing we could have done to make your stay better, what would it have been? One thing. And I've never, ever been asked that. And those that have accommodation in the audience, have you ever pretended to be a guest and actually stayed overnight and checked out your own place? Have you ever asked a friend or a friend of a friend to check out your entire end-to-end experience? How easy was it to book? How easy it was to find your facility online? What was the website like? What about getting there? What about the road signs? Then the whole experience once they got there. Asking for honest, constructive feedback. So a few thoughts from my past. But what is data? Well, at its most basic, it's simply a collection of facts. Numbers, measurements, observations. Not only financial data, but data on social impact, environmental benefits, visitor numbers, jobs secured, jobs created. What brings it alive, of course, is analysing and insight. I always remember being told by the Visit Scotland comms team that our e-communications, which had been sent to over 7,000 businesses, was opened by 25%, which was above the national average for such activity. I had to point out to them that that meant that 75% of the people that we'd sent the comms to hadn't even opened it. And worse still, we had no idea what they did as a result of opening that communication. Sometimes we need to challenge data by asking the simple question, and I used to do this a lot, so what? But why does data matter? Data can tell you what you need to do next. It enables you to make informed decisions. And again, I well remember way back in the early days of the Borders Tourist Board, when we were trying to encourage businesses to think about online booking. There's an idea. I well remember being called to task by a very irate bed and breakfast landlady sitting right in the front row of the AGM. She said, "You see, son, you didn't understand. I like to speak to my customers on the phone." Well, I've got news for you. They didn't want to speak to you. Or the use of credit card payments way back in the 1980s, when some people still stuck their heels in and wanted cash rather than use the card. Data exposes inefficiencies and disadvantages. It helps you identify problems, but it can also show what you're doing well. Data opens up opportunities. It shines a light on what's possible and has the power to make a reality. Data backs up arguments. Everyone has an opinion, and that opinion is a sample of one. But properly collated and collected data can confirm or destroy a particular opinion and theory. Data can help get your hands on money. You wouldn't expect someone to invest £100,000 on new accommodation and have no idea what the impact of that investment was likely to make on your business. Above all, data is a business asset, and it should be prioritized as highly as revenue, as customer experience, and profitability. But here's the rub. Collecting data for the sake of it doesn't make sense. Data collection should always be focused on solving a business problem and align with your strategy or business plan. And as I said earlier, data on its own is pretty meaningless. It needs to be interpreted and analyzed. So what are these figures telling us? Is that feedback we're receiving just a one-off, or is it a trend? And again, I well remember a large historic house in the Scottish Borders that shall remain nameless. It begins with an M. And I got a phone call from the owner, and he said, 10 years ago, we used to receive 50 coach parties a year, and now we only get 10. What am I doing wrong? I said, well, I haven't a clue, but have you ever asked the 40 that don't come why they don't come anymore? Oh, I couldn't do that. So that simple thing about thinking about what is behind the data and what it's telling you is really important. And of course, the dreaded GDPR is something that you need to be cognizant of when collecting and using customer data. That would probably take up another conference to cover. After the first meeting my former boss at Visit Scotland, Malcolm Ruffhead, had with the new Tourism Minister, Ivan McKee, he reported back to the senior team that the Minister was looking for data-driven decision-making. So there's a clear steer from the government, if ever one was needed. Earlier today, the Cabinet Secretary, Marie Goujon, launched our exciting new growth strategy for Scottish agri-tourism. And within that document are sections lifting from Raymond's growth tracker study, that would be good, Thomas's international best practice, and of course all the other data that's listed in the document. The document defines where the sector currently is in terms of membership, and crucially a success for 2030, or whatever Caroline said earlier on. But we can only tell if the strategy or the actions arising from it have been a success if we can measure the outcomes. Most of the actions outlined in the strategy document will require investment, either in resources to manage them or in areas such as marketing, in terms of capital investment or award grants to individual businesses. We need to be able to measure whether the actions from the strategy have made a positive difference to business, the sector, and the economy over the coming years. And at a national scale, for a sector, the data from your own individual business then becomes even more vital. And I know while Raymond played down the fact that he was pleased with the results, there were still a large number of data sets that were missing for various reasons. And I think it's all more important going forward that everyone signs up to the growth tracker for future, and we get absolutely up-to-date, accurate data. So all of those examples are predicated on data. Indeed, if you look at each objective, each strand of the strategy, you could identify what data will be needed to collect to measure progress and success. Scottish agritourism is at a crucial point in its development, and there are many challenges ahead. Why, for instance, should a farming enterprise or crofter, either thinking of diversifying into tourism or one already involved but looking to expand, why should they join a new organisation or continue paying an annual membership fee? Look at all the other opportunities to be part of something bigger. So Scottish agritourism needs to present a compelling case to business. It needs to show through the data it collects that it is making a difference, that there is a value in being a member, and it is providing a positive, measurable contribution to the growth of individual businesses. And equally, Scottish agritourism needs to provide government and the sponsors that the sector is worth supporting and investing in the long term, and that there are genuine, measurable benefits in terms of sustainable growth for the sector. And that's why Caroline has been badgering you all. I'm confident with what I've experienced so far over the past 2 days that that is more than achievable. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why data matters. Thank you.
Riddell, thank you, and thank you for being clear and concise about why data matters, because it can be a drag. You mentioned GDPR. We're not going down that rabbit hole, so anyone that asks a GDPR question will be asked to leave and they won't get their lunch. I'm sure there are other things that we can cover. If we can get questions from the floor first. I am the thing standing between you and your lunch, so let's have some interaction questions. You've heard of an hour of presentations. Someone has got a question here, so let's get your hand up and get a microphone to you. Come on, guys. Told you it was a bit of a graveyard slot. There's lots in here. There are no questions, so none of you sitting there thought, oh, I don't agree with that. Hang on a second. Well, there's a question from online. Raymond, we'll go to you first. What's the current growth potential for the farmer category here? Obviously, every farm has an opportunity for diversification, but some haven't yet done it. And how many farmers are not yet members? And do we know from any other data sets? Riddell, you just touched on that just there. We know there are big holes in this. We know there are big businesses that haven't returned the census. From your point of view, Raymond, do you think the growth's there? How do you see it as an economist? Because Riddell's quite close to this because he's been involved for quite a long time. I'm quite keen on it succeeding, but you're new to it as a data set, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's at least 500 businesses that we know of that are registered, so I think as a conservative estimate, we're thinking around 700 at the moment. But the growth really comes from not just the new entrants, but also the current stock, and they're incredibly optimistic about what the future holds in terms of expansion. And I think that one of the key growth potentials as well is looking at how you manoeuvre the value associated with farm retail, which may not include on-site consumption of produce, and turning that into an experience and developing it that way. So, I mean, there's huge potential. We're talking about 12,000, 15,000 farms in Scotland. Huge potential.
Yeah, 179 responses. That's not even 100% of those people involved in the conference online at the moment. So something tells me that there's a quick win out there. The minister wants a hook to give policy support to. Riddell, you just touched on that.
Yeah, and I think I was privileged to sit in on the press briefing that the Cabinet Secretary gave before the conference started this morning, and Caroline was put in the spot about that very point, what is the growth potential? And I think there's huge potential really in the short term, and part of the work that's being done to activate this strategy is to bring in a new website that will give members a benefit. You have to provide, it's that kind of classic Why should I bother? What's in it for me? And if you can't answer that question to a business, then you're not going to engage with them. And Caroline and the team have done a huge amount already on that. So there's going to be a very impressive new website, consumer-facing, but also a business-to-business one. And just listening to the examples yesterday from the destination leaders, the chat there is incredible. So I think building on what we've already got and looking to the future, I think the potential is there. And you'll hear this afternoon from Vicky Miller, Visit Scotland Marketing Director, about how Visit Scotland is going to help that as well. So it's there's a momentum building here, and I think that can only be good for not just the short term, but the longer term in terms of membership growth.
Great. I use different websites to book things. There's a business in here that got quite a substantial booking from us as a family from Go Rural and from that network. Thomas, you've seen more established countries now. Where do you think we are in that growth curve? Are we right at the foothills? Are we on the medium slopes? Where do you think the opportunity is for Scottish agri-tourism from your perspective, having done some research across Europe?
I think hearing the numbers, I think you're in a starting phase, I would say. So I think you have all the possibilities to further develop the sector. And if I heard you have 500, 600 agritourism businesses now, and based on the figures I know from Italy and from our region, there's a huge potential for further development. So I think I agree with what was said before, that there's obviously the potential to develop. But the point is how to develop the sector. And this is a little bit the key aspect and the key message I wanted to hopefully to transfer it a little bit. And this is what I think should be further discussed in the Agritourism Growth Strategy Group. What kind of activities, what kind of limits, and so on. Obviously, everything is possible, but if you make it too open, the sector, you get in conflict with other sectors, and you lose your unique selling position. And this is what are my major concerns.
I loved your farmhouse as a pharmacy. No better time and hook for COVID. We all know there was a figure there to say that in your survey that some of the data sets didn't think they would recover to pre-COVID spending levels to 24-25. Actually, in parts of rural Scotland, I think there's a different story there, because people have sought to get away from crowded spaces. We only needed to see the impact on rural Scotland last year. Any questions from the floor? Hungry and hungover? One in the middle here, Stephen Whiteford. Can we get a microphone into the middle, please?
This is probably to Thomas. I suppose it's for data collection, though. Is there anything that internationally is done differently? Obviously our numbers for collecting data aren't just as good as what we've seen from Thomas. So is there a trick to gaining data or getting people to share their data more freely?
Thomas, did you get that okay?
Yeah, it was the question on the data, on the figures I presented on international level. Yeah, these are, please take these figures as rough approximation, and I provided the sources for them. Even in Austria, we have different indications. So it's not easy, and there are even in Italy, Italy is quite monitored quite well. But if it comes up to concrete economic numbers, it's difficult, because agritourism is part of a secondary activity on a farm, and this means that it's integrated in various other activities. So this is absolutely right. We need a more monitoring that is based on definitions and to monitor the sector and to understand the developments. But again, as I presented, the definitions are very, very verified and change from country to country. So it is not my intention to make a homogenization of the sector and so on, and to say it should look everywhere like in Italy. But obviously we need some key characteristics of the farms that are the key elements of a definition, and the key different elements of a definition can be then the base for monitoring and statistical surveys and so on.
I think one of the things around that, Thomas, is that there's a question here. Is there data to prove that there is demand from the public? And Italy shows that there are parts of the world that are doing much better than we are. So if you go to the foothills, we are in the foothills, Riddell, aren't we?
Yeah, I think I'll not steal Vicky's thunder because she's got some interesting data on demand. But the Google Agritourism piece that I subscribe to, there's some unbelievable data from other parts of the world that show clearly not only is there huge demand, but the growth predictions going forward for the next 5 to 10 years are massive. Now, I know you're not comparing like with like, but if it's happening in other parts of the world and there's a demand there, then you have to assume that that's going to be the case in Scotland, without a doubt.
Well, if you look at Scotland Food and Drink and the growth sector, Mary as a minister will talk about it, big session at COP yesterday. We celebrate Scottish food and drink, landscapes and tourism. So why would we not, in the agri-tourism, follow a similar trend? And if you look at that data set, we're quite a long way behind the curve, I guess, Raymond?
Yep.
So opportunities there for us to take. We've got a question just at the back right there.
Hi, thank you. So I'm interested actually in what the panel and members more widely think about try to put this into words, so the difference or the importance of restrictive definitions over more inclusive ones that help to embrace the ethos of what the sector is about, because I think particularly in an early phase, you wonder whether people think, oh, maybe I don't fall within that definition or that kind of, but they do subscribe to the ethos, and they've got so the working farm I think is very important, but there's a lot of range I think in the type of product, and I think possibly restriction can stifle innovation in some ways. And also just in terms of data, I wanted to ask the question about qualitative data, so gathering opinions. I mean, even just speaking to people around this room, the importance of being part of something like Scottish Agritourism, it's not necessarily something that can be put into numbers, it's something that they've become part of, and the importance in those types of data shouldn't be overlooked.
Raymond, I'm going to come to you on the data part of that first. Yeah. Raymond?
Yep. No, I think that's a great point, because it also ties into what Riddell was saying as well. Data on its own can be sort of meaningless, so we have to have that narrative associated with the data to get across all the non-quantifiable aspects in terms of creating critical mass in rural economies and all the extra additional benefits that agri-tourism brings to rural communities.
Yeah, I think, and I know Caroline's doing work on storytelling, and especially for next year. We've got loads of anecdotal, we've got loads of romance and story about the agri-tourism piece. And actually, we probably have to try and merge those two, do we, Riddell? Try and get them combined with the data set that Raymond's sitting on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point about if you are too restrictive, then are you going to exclude? I think the work that Caroline's done with the leaders in the industry provides a definition that's wide enough to encapsulate everyone, but enables you to be absolutely clear when you're communicating to the consumer what is and isn't included. And I think the whole issue about quality of the experience, the link with food and drink, and the very important part about the working farm situation, these are all very important parts of the offer. I mean, Caroline spoke eloquently about that this morning when she was building up the strategy discussion. So I don't believe that the current definition that's been agreed is that going to exclude too many businesses. I think it enables innovation. Certainly the sessions that I listened into yesterday, the amount of innovation that's happening within that overall definition is immense. And I don't think it would be restricted by the definition that's already included.
Yeah. Thomas, just briefly, that some of those definitions that you've given us, I guess, have changed and matured across Europe. You know, I can't imagine the Italian definition is the same as it was when they first set out. Do you see a sort of narrowing or an opening of definitions when we're at the early starts of these journeys?
Generally, I see, speaking for Italy, I see an opening. So we had an amendment of the first law that allowed cooperatives and non-family farms offering agritourism. And this is, at least in literature and scientific community, a hugely discussed issue, because it opened the gate or the possibility to more commercial activities on the farm, meaning with higher bed limits and so on. So we have in Tuscany and Veneto region, we have a limit of 30 beds per farm. And I think this is a quite high limit for providing agritourism. In my understanding, I say this is my understanding of authentic agritourism. I don't say that this is the right one, but I think this is one approach, and it depends very much. I agree, we should not be too narrow. There are many activities that are very innovative that try to evaluate and give value to the farm based on the assets of the farm. But again, what are the goals? What kind of farm do I want to support? Do we talk about small family farms who need, based on a specific family situation on the farm, additional on-farm support, income support? Which farms do I want to fund or provide subsidies to? And so on. And this depends a little bit. And the other point is to make it distinctive to other sectors. If I offer on a farm the same facilities and the same assets that I can have 200 meters distant in a hotel, so what is the difference then? I think it's a little bit a dilemma to make it not too narrow and not too open. And I think we have to agree on key elements. And I provided some example based on the concept of authentic agritourism as an example.
No, I think you're right. And Scottish agriculture has many shapes and sizes, and you know, Scottish tourism exactly the same. So if you bring the two together, you don't want to be too restrictive. I believe in the proceed till apprehended approach, and I think from my point of view, this data set gives us an opportunity to say to government, to ministers, to decision makers, back us, it's important, we've got a high growth sector. And the bottom line is the 79 responses, if you get the graph doing a steep curve up from there, data-driven decisions at cabinet level, the question was asked, who's your supporter? If you've got a high growth sector, you'll have a lot more supporters than just Mary in there. So we're going to go to the back, just up on the second level, for a final question. I think it's Monty from Seen and Heard in the On Farm podcast.
Yeah, Ross Montague, On Farm podcast. Alan, this question might be more aimed at you, if that's appropriate. And I pick on you because you're maybe an example or a representative of the wider agricultural world. I guess there was a lot of excitement yesterday and a lot of great case studies. We're hearing today there's a lot of enthusiasm amongst people involved in the sector to grow the sector. There was some stats there about why there's some resistance and why people are not confident about stepping into this. But I really want to turn to you. Why do you think we're not seeing more than 500 businesses involved at the moment? What can we do to encourage more? I guess we're going to hear that there's massive demand from the consumer, and we certainly saw that in Italy. The figures, there seems to be massive demand. So what can we do to help other farmers, others involved in agriculture to grow this sector?
It's an interesting question, and I think from my perspective, there's a lot of people just getting on with it. They're just doing their day job and they don't maybe recognise that they're part of the sector. So that's back to definitions. If you restrict the definition too tightly, the people who respond to Raymond's survey will go down. So I think, I don't know how many people are online at the moment, but, quite a lot in the room. we're underselling the range, the scope, the depth of what we're doing, because a lot of people are just saying, I'm not really doing agritourism, I'm just doing my own thing. So I think we need to be better. As Scots, we need to be better at celebrating. If you look at James Withers and the success of Scotland Food and Drink, it's because there was a mindset shift. There was a mindset shift to say, we are delivering some of the best products in the world and we're going to celebrate that. So for me, I think that that's where a little bit of collaborative effort between the members of Guru and the group, collaborative success sharing, and ultimately driving standards up, because then you can really bang a drum, because you know that the guy or the girl sitting either side of you in the conference hall or on that website are at the standards that you would hope to be. And that's when you can really start to celebrate Scotland's tourism, its agriculture, and things like that. And the stories are great. My family, we stayed in an Agri-Tourism in Fife, who are here today, and my 5-year-old and 3-year-old are still talking about the tour of the Land Rover with Farmer Rich. They absolutely loved it, and they're still talking about it, and they want to go back. And we forget, as agricultural people who are close to the sector, how much learning and opportunity it comes from. We had a RET Schools Day yesterday at Stirling, and when you see the eyes of kids literally blown away just by seeing an animal or a tractor at the Royal Highland Show, at a farm visit, at an agritourism, that's a value, that's an intangible that we don't always remember is there. And if that's worth £10, £20, £50 on your visit, that's a piece of data that you need to record. So I think there's loads of opportunity and real excitement and buzz about the conference. Thomas, I'm going to say thank you to you for joining us from afar. Super, and I appreciate that. I'm going to get off on time for lunch. Monty has spoken from the On Farm podcast. I know Ledingham Chalmers are supporting that. If you don't listen to On Farm, do. And I know they're really celebrating the farm tourism, agri-tourism sort of message, which is super, because without getting that message beyond this room, we're probably going to be speaking to the sort of preaching to the converted. Lunch is now outside. Alpha Projects, who have been supporting Caroline build her final hideaway, have kindly supported lunch. I've seen the hideaway in its almost completed state, and it's again up to Caroline's usual standards. Back in here at 1:30 sharp. There's stands and networking outside. Visit Scotland are going to help you get your listings if you've not got that yet, and we've now heard why that's so important. Craig Stevens is bouncing around in his usual effervescent self with his camera doing videos and headshots, and Monty and Dave are recording for the On Farm podcast. So as well as getting some sustenance to get you going for the afternoon session, there's also lots to think about over lunch. Back in here at 1:30, as Riddell said, there's some really interesting stuff coming up this afternoon. So thank you all for your patience, your questions, and thank you to all the panel for their efforts this morning.